Good morning and welcome to Across the Arts. I'm your host, Patrick D. McCoy, and I'm delighted to have you join us today for the conversation series, a special interview with composer Dr. Roy L. Belfield Jr. Roy L. Belfield Jr. is a native of Petersburg, Virginia, and he began his undergraduate studies in music at Dillard University in New Orleans, Louisiana. He has done additional studies in vocal pedagogy and choral conducting at the University of Alabama, Pennsylvania State University, and the University of Southern California. Dr. Belfield has studied choral conducting with David Morrow, Rodney Eichelberger, Scott Anderson, and Lynn Dreyfus, and piano with Marilyn Breeden, Buckner Gamby, and Moses Hogan. His principal organ teachers have included Dr. Carl G. Harris Jr., Clarence E. Whiteman, Herman D. Taylor, Joyce F. Johnson, Michael L. Corzine, and John Obitz. Dr. Roy Belfield has taught students from preschool to college to 23 years. As a church musician, he has served 6 denominations throughout the country. Belfield has collaborated as an accompanist with numerous choirs, vocalists, and instrumentalists. As composer and arranger, Dr. Belfield has written works for chorus, voice, piano, and organ. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Roy L. Belfield Jr. to this very special composer spotlight. Good morning, Roy.
Good morning, Patrick. How are you? And thank you for inviting me to do this.
I am good. And this is like, a full circle moment, me talking to you, because of course both from Petersburg, as everyone heard me, read in the bio. So of course it's like, not like, I'm talking to an old friend. So indeed, welcome this morning to Across the Arts. Now, Roy, I read your bio, and it's just so many wonderful attributes that you have as a musician, as a composer, as a conductor, as an arranger, as an accompanist. What don't you do? Oh my goodness. When did you realize that you wanted to pursue a career in music, especially like decide, hey, I want to major in music, I want to go to pursue music at the college level? How did that happen?
Well, I've known nothing but music all my life. I always go back to my home church, Shiloh Baptist Church, Chesterfield County, Virginia, which is, of course, outside of Petersburg. At that time in the 70s, early 70s, the minister of music and organist was Marilyn Breeden. Miss Breeden was a graduate of Virginia State University, and at that time, she was an elementary school music teacher. And I was always fascinated with anyone playing the organ, the buttons, and all the keyboards. It was very fascinating to me. And I remember watching her one Sunday morning as she played a postlude. And she just invited me to come up and just sit at the organ bench and just play keys, or as I say, mash keys, because I wasn't even 7 years old. I was maybe 6. And I often credit her because if she had not been sensitive enough to invite me just to sit at the organ, that kind of inspiration did something to me and for me. And I'll never forget it. I'll never forget it. So I always am sensitive to children when they are watching what I do at the organ. Sure, I'll let them come and sit and play keys or play a tune or pull a button or what have you. I know it's fascinating to them because it was fascinating to me. And later, once I could actually read the words, that is, because I was probably in the first grade heading to second grade at that time, I started studying piano with her. So that had to have been around 1975, 76. And that's all I've ever known since.
Oh my goodness. And so then when, of course, you used to watch her play the organ and you watched her play the organ postludes, and then of course you studied piano with her. Was it a challenge for you to transfer or to transition to playing the organ? Because you got a lot going on with the organ. You got your hands and your feet. Talk to me about that.
Well, Miss Breeden didn't teach organ. Well, didn't teach me organ. She taught piano. Uh, I later studied organ with Carl Harris, Dr. Carl G. Harris Jr., who was at that time music department chair at Virginia State. And more importantly, I think he was organist at Belfield Baptist Church. And I have always admired the music program at Belfield Baptist. And he agreed around 1979, 1980. He agreed upon the encouragement from my late godmother, who was a member of Guilfield. Dr. Harris took me on as an organ student, and Guilfield was in the process of installing their new Austin organ. So I took my first organ lessons at Virginia State in Virginia Hall on the 3 manual Allen organs there.
That is amazing. Now you've mentioned several names that resonate with me, especially of course the late Dr. Carl Harris. And I remember a few years ago you had this wonderful article that came out in the American Guild of Organists journal about his career and his life, and it was just so expansive. But I want to hit on another mentor of yours who we share, who I know you adore, and you recently played. I remember I came to an organ recital of yours in DC, and you played works of this great man. Talk to me about the impact of none other than Buckner Gamby.
I don't think I cannot talk about anything that I have done as a musician without talking about Carl Harris and Buckner Gamby. And there are other names, Clarence Whiteman, of course, you've mentioned these names. Mr. Gamby taught my first piano teacher, Marilyn Breeden. And when she became ill in 1983, she subsequently passed away early 1984. I went to Mr. Gamby at the suggestion of Carl Harris to continue my piano studies. So when Ms. Breeden died in February of 1984, I actually was already working with Mr. Gamby, not consistently, but just to keep that momentum of studying going. So after she passed, I started working with him on a regular basis. And I should go back. Ms. Breeden took me everywhere she could. She took me to the choral concerts with the American Guild of Organists. They would do this, I think they call it the Southside Virginia Choral Festival. I remember going to one at Washington Street United Methodist Church. Carl Harris was directing, and she took me to I'm going to get this wrong, I think, but it was the Southside. Oh, it was a concert series, and they had it at Petersburg High. I remember hearing and seeing Florence Quivar. They had all these.
Oh my goodness, the community concerts. I remember those.
Community concert. Yes, yes. She took me there. And of course, at that time, she was still playing for my home church. So she gradually started to have me play for church, accompanying the children's choirs. So she just took me under her wing. And I had to go back and say that because Mr. Gamby did the same thing in a different way. By the time I was working with him, I was driving. But he would invite me to play for him, accompany his choirs at First Baptist. And when he felt I was ready, if you remember, Virginia State's commencement was on a Sunday, usually Mother's Day, if I recall. And when he couldn't play at First Baptist and had to be on campus at Virginia State, he would ask me. Of course, I was in high school, late high school by that time. I remember him asking me to accompany him for the Bethany Baptist Association, which he inherited from Carl Harris. Carl Harris first introduced me to that because I heard of it through Carl Harris. He was directing at the time, and he would take me with him to play, accompany that choir, that convention choir, which would happen during the summer. And then when he left the area, he passed it on to Mr. Gamby, who did the same thing. I was playing for this choir with Mr. Gamby. So they were more than my teachers. They were family. They were father figures. They were mother figures. And I'm including Miss Breeden and anyone who taught me, because it was true guidance. And I'm just very blessed to have had these people in my life.
You know, you've had an amazing network, especially where everything comes together, where the church has formed the center, and then you have these great teachers and this HBCU experience with Virginia State. But talk to me a little bit about, when you moved on to go study college, and you went off to Dillard and then Morehouse. Talk to me about the HBCU experience and how important that was to you and your musical training.
It was never a discussion, never. I always wanted to attend a small historically Black college or university. And Dillard came about by way of another mentor, Undine Smith Moore, who was a member of Guilford Baptist Church,
Wow.
living, walking, living, and breathing during that time, worshiping Sunday after Sunday, sitting in the same place. She called my mother one Saturday, I'll never forget it, and said to my mother that if I wanted to be a serious organ student, I had to study with a master teacher. And she gave my mother two options. She said he can go to the University of Michigan, where he can study with Marilyn Mason, or he can go to Dillard University to study with Marilyn Mason's student, Herman D. Taylor. Well, there was no question. I wanted to go to Dillard. I never heard of Dillard. And my mother and I laugh about that to this day. And recently, my mother was able to share with Undine Moore's daughter this story. And my mother will always say, how dare she tell me where to send my child to go to school? But, well, anyone who knew Undine Moore, she was going to say whatever was on her mind, and she was just going to uh, be very honest and forthright. And so it was Undine Moore who introduced me to Dillard. And I fell in love with Dillard. Herman Taylor at that time was concertizing. It was the 300th anniversary of Bach, and he had committed to performances across the country and in Europe as well, performing all of Bach's works, organ works, from memory. So I went to Dillard during that time, and the only reason I transferred was because I heard the Morehouse College Glee Club, October 31st, 1986. Morehouse and Dillard had an exchange going on at that time. Morehouse would perform in October. They did it was a Louisiana, Texas tour in the fall. And they would perform at Dillard. And then Dillard's choir, at the end of its tour in April, the last stop was Morehouse College. But in all fairness, I really had thought about Morehouse, but by the time I was thinking about Morehouse, Dillard was moving very swiftly, getting me enrolled and putting pieces in place. So I never thought about it. I said, well, Dillard it is. It seems to be happening and in the cards. But I never gave up on the idea of Morehouse. And when I heard the Glee Club, at that time, Wendell Whalum was living. David Morrow was his assistant. And so Wendell Whalum knew that I was interested in Morehouse. And he said to me after that concert, if you change your mind, let me know. And during the spring tour, when I was accompanying the Dillard Choir, I told him on the campus of Morehouse in 1987, I'm ready to do this. And so we decided that since he was a regular at the Hampton Ministers Conference, he says, well, you're a native of Virginia, you're from Petersburg. Why don't you come to the conference and we can talk about how this transfer is going to happen. And I'll never forget, Wendell Whalum took the time to sit with me on the steps of Turner Hall. And we talked about my transferring to Morehouse. And it was in that conversation he said, now, Roy, when you arrive at Morehouse, you will be studying organ with Dr. Joyce Finch Johnson. There was never a question. And he said, and I quote, you will simply love her. So that's another mentor later down the road, but someone else who's been very influential and is still very much alive.
How amazing, Roy. Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
So I know this is not a part of a formalized question that I sent you, but I'm just, the more you talk, it's like, oh my God, you was at the same church, of course, at Guilfield, attending church with the legendary Undine Smith Moore. I mean, as a young person, did you know her influence quite as you know it today, that you now that you look back on exactly who this woman was?
I was totally ignorant. I knew she was somebody, but I really didn't know who she was until I became a little older. Uh, she was intimidating, but at the same time, very sweet. Uh, I must confess, whenever I played, and by the time it was my senior year in high school, I think, when I became organist at Guilfield. Dr. Harris had moved on to Norfolk State, And I don't know if you know this or not, but Reverend Powell, who was pastor at that time, uh, would not consider me as organist. He thought I was too young.
Oh.
And you may or may not remember, Mrs. Johnella Edmonds was one of the candidates for that position, and she was hired. She didn't stay long, but she was hired. Reverend Powell went through everybody before he finally came to me. Carl Harris had recommended me, but Reverend Powell thought I was just too young to handle it. So finally, I guess when he couldn't look anywhere else, or I'd run out of options, he did come to me, and it worked out fine. But I said all that to say Undine Moore was sitting in that congregation Sunday after Sunday, and I always did myself a disservice by looking over to see if she was in place before I played the prelude. I don't know why, because it just made me very nervous to see her sitting over there with her arms folded. But she would do this, and I'll never forget it. If she liked what you played or what she heard sung on Sunday morning, she would make a point to come up and say something to me or the director. It could have been Mr. Relaford, who was there at the time. Uh, and I often wondered if she didn't come up and speak, maybe she wasn't pleased with what happened. But I took some of that for granted, and I didn't realize it until later, because Undine Moore would come up to the organ console after services, not every Sunday, but sometimes she would come up with a compliment, and she would let me know personally just what she thought of my prelude uh, or postlude or the hymn playing or whatever. Yes, I have those memories, but I just wished I had gotten to know her a little better. And my mother begged me to go and just study with her at her home. Just go by and sit down and have a conversation with her, ask her to give you a quick piano lesson or a theory lesson or whatever. I didn't listen. I didn't
Mm.
listen. But when I left for Dillard, Undine Moore said this to me: um, if you're going to be a serious music student, you must have a Harvard Dictionary of Music. Or she asked me if I had one, and at the time I did not. And she says, well, I will look around my home, and maybe I have an older edition. And she did. She found an older edition, and we could not connect. I never was able to meet her to get it, but she said, I'm going to leave it in my door, in the screen door. And I still have that Harvard Dictionary to this day, and it bears her signature throughout. That was something she did. She put her signature on random pages, not only the cover or the back. And it's an early 1970 something edition of Harvard. But she said, you must have a Harvard Dictionary.
That oh my goodness, that's amazing. I mean, we're giving the audience two spotlights for one, because on this special concert that the Heritage Signature Chorale is doing on February the 22nd, they're doing the piece Bound for Canaan's Land by Undine Smith Moore. But it's just so wonderful to hear you have these personal memories and connections. Most of us, we only know of Professor Moore from afar. And of course, my time directing the choir, that the history of her pieces and things like that. So thank you so much for that insight. Now, something else that really fascinated me is when I know we hit on you being a composer, so to speak, when I read your bio, and you just mentioned uh, the organ and things like that. How do you balance, because as I mentioned to the listeners, you are a composer, you are an organist, you're a college professor. How do you balance all of that? For instance, how do you carve out time to practice?
Very good question. Very good point. Uh, I think it's important for the audience to know I did not start out as a conductor. I have always been an organist, an accompanist. The conducting did not come until 2006, when I was at Winston-Salem State University. I was assistant director of choirs there. And that's when the choral bug took a hold of me. And I subsequently went to the University of Maryland Eastern Shore to have my own program. And I asked myself the same question. I'm an organist. Actually, I went to my teacher, David Morrow, from Morehouse, and I said, how am I supposed to juggle, you know, my background is organ, but because I'm composing and arranging, I'm being pulled into conducting more and more. And he says, well, I'm not surprised. You're destined to do other things than play the organ. But I went to Wayne Barr, and I know you know that name, Dr. Wayne Barr
Yes.
from Tuskegee University. I will remember approaching him because he does both. Wayne has degrees in organ performance, but he's also, and has been for quite a while, he's been director of the Golden, I think it's the Golden Voices of Tuskegee
Mhm.
University. And he made it very clear. I said, Wayne, how do you manage to keep your organ skills going? He says, Roy, you just have to make time for the organ. So to your question, I made a promise to myself I would never let go of the organ. Uh, in fact, I owe you this information because we didn't connect last year, but I will be back at National City Christian Church for their midday recitals starting, well, they started this month, but I'm on the 21st next week.
Okay.
So every opportunity I have to perform as an organist, I take advantage of it. Uh, every place I've been hired, I make it very clear that I am a performer. Yes, I'm a choral director as well, but my instrument is the organ, and I am not going to let it go. My teacher, Joyce Johnson, would not have it. So uh, I just I just do what I can. When the opportunities are there, I take advantage of it. Uh, I do a lot of accompanying, which involves the organ from time to time. Uh, so it is a juggling act. It really is. But I will not let go of the organ. And I might add, I like having that solo career constantly going because when the choir is shut down during the summer, I still have a platform. I still
Mhm.
have a platform. So it's important to me that I keep those skills going because that's how I started. That's how I started, and I will always be an organist. Yeah.
Well, we need to make February 21st and 22nd a Roy Belfield weekend because, you're doing this big recital. And for those who don't know National City Christian Church here in our nation's capital, it is surely a treasure, just the organ, the architecture, and everything. And so Roy is going to be playing on the noonday concert series that they have. So, and it's free, right? I believe it's free and open to the public. So,
It is
so
free.
put that on your calendar and then come hear the Heritage Signature Chorale on the 22nd for the Black Composers Concert. Now, we I want to talk a little bit more about that arranging because you hit on the arranging as well as we were getting to your prowess at the organ. Now on this concert on the February 22nd by the Heritage Signature Chorale, and I encourage you all to get your tickets if you haven't gotten them. They're doing your arrangement of Wade in the Water. Talk to me about maybe the challenge that it is to arrange something traditional such as a spiritual or something that's well known.
I hasten to not correct you, but is Take Me to the Water, I believe.
Oh, Take Me to the Water. I'm sorry. I
Is
must have.
Yeah, that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. I hope it's Take Me to the Water. That's the only arrangement I have published. Uh, and it is the most recent publication, choral publication. Um, well, one of the things I attempt to do when I uh, set out to arrange a spiritual is to be true to what I heard as a child. Uh, I grew up in a small Baptist church in Chesterfield County, and again, I'm so grateful for the year 1968 because when I came along, the members of my church and area churches, and even those churches in Petersburg, some, not all, but they were singing the spirituals during prayer meetings, devotional services, and revivals. I remember going to revival services as a child, and before there was any formality, you would walk in and there would be a table in the set up in front of the communion table with two chairs, and it could be a deacon, it could be a deaconess, it could be two deaconesses. two members, but they were leading those devotional services, and people were just randomly singing spontaneous spirituals, old gospel hymns, adding verses one after the other. And I took a tape recorder with me at that time. Everywhere I went, like that, a revival, worship service where I knew this music was going to be sung. I recorded those services. Um, so to arrange a spiritual, and this is just my perspective, if I'm going to arrange a spiritual, I want to do something that can only enhance what is already beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. So, Carl Harris and I had conversations about this, near the end of his life, about over arranging, excessive use of the dialect, and again, different strokes for different folks. But I'm a creature of my influences. And I've already mentioned Undine Moore, and I have to mention another name too, someone I didn't get to know very well, but came to know late in life, or his life, Philip McIntyre.
Oh my goodness.
Philip McIntyre was a student of Undine Moore. After she retired from Virginia State, she taught at Union, where he was a student. So these are the names: Philip McIntyre, Undine Moore. When I think of the arranged spiritual, because he and I share our common adoration for Undine Moore. And if you look at what Undine Moore did an arranger of spirituals, first of all, there were many that were unfamiliar or just unique to Southside Virginia. Having grown up in a small place called Jarrett, Virginia, I still owe myself a visit to that area to see what's going on there. But she would simply take a fragment of something and then enhance it just a little bit, just enough to make it into a work of art. But it was still a spiritual, it was still worshipful. It was the essence of the spiritual was still there. Uh, so that's my goal. Whenever I have something on my mind to arrange, I haven't arranged a spiritual in a long time for voices. Uh, But when I do, I think of Philip, I think of Undine Moore, and I think of Carl Harris. And I'll go back to Buckner Gamby. Mr. Gamby was a wealth of knowledge when it comes to the spiritual. Not only could he direct it, but he could play it as well. And his style, his unique style of improvising, is one that I just don't think I'll ever hear in my lifetime again. But these people, Carl Harris, Buckner Gamby, well, I could call names forever. Aldrich Atkins is another name associated with Virginia State. Uh, Philip, Undine, Mr. Relevant, I mentioned that name. These were personalities who were living and breathing and singing the spirituals, and they were teaching me whether they knew it or not. So I'll summarize by saying I just try to be true to the essence of the spiritual. I want it to still be something worshipful. Uh, and not too covered up, but just enough to say, okay, here's a little extra twist, but it is still essentially a spiritual uh, that really comes from my background, my church music experiences. Uh, a lot of what I've heard comes from churches not only in Virginia, but I spent time in Georgia as well. So I have those church music experiences. So I hope that answers your question.
Oh, it did. And one of my favorite anthems by Philip McIntyre is That's How Good God Is. A lot of
Mhm.
choirs do that. And I just like the fact that you even lifted him up because, of course, he has a solid Washington, D.C. connection and people knew him as an organist. But I have a story. I don't know. You may have heard this story or may have not heard this story I'm about to tell. I better be careful. I might get myself in trouble because I understand that Philip McIntyre years ago did a workshop, a choral workshop at Belfield Baptist Church, which you mentioned.
Langhorn, was it Langhorn Anderson?
So I won't say anymore, but I heard that that
Really?
was a interesting workshop.
I
Oh my God.
only met Philip one time. I met Philip in 1990 when the Morehouse Glee Club was on tour in DC, and he came to our concert at 19th Street Baptist Church. And I asked him to autograph his collection of spirituals for voice and piano. It had just come out at that time. Uh, but subsequently, after he died, I started asking people about Philip, uh, not only the musician, just who was Philip McIntyre. And oh, I learned a lot about Philip McIntyre and his personality. Uh, let's just say he did not mince words.
No.
Uh, oh, I can think of several people who had not necessarily the kindest things to say about Philip, but they could not take away from his musicianship. They may
Oh,
not have liked him as a
absolutely.
person, but uh, but Philip was a very good musician.
He
Uh,
was.
I,
And it's so
I,
funny. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I don't know your platform well enough, but I want to share a story, and I won't call the name. But I know how to work around this. I remember asking a fellow musician who knew Philip, and I won't quote him exactly. I'll modify the response. And I said to this musician, he and Philip are about the same age, they're contemporaries. I said, why is it I'm having such a hard time getting people to talk about Philip? I said, there are people who, if they respond, it's not anything kind, or they don't want to give him any uh, say credit or attention. I said, what is it about Philip that keeps people holding on to whatever happened years ago? And the response was, Roy, Philip was and he used the word that rhymed with snitch.
Oh my goodness.
I won't desecrate your platform. He said, Philip is a blank, rhymes with snitch. He said, but he was one damn good musician. And that's all that mattered as far as I was concerned. So I could spend all of our time talking about Philip and others, uh, but he, in my opinion, uh, and you know this, I did a lot of research on Philip and his music, and was able to thankfully have his organ music, all of his organ music, published so after my doctoral work. And I'm even proud of the fact that my organ professor, Dr. John Obetz, allowed me to um, highlight Philip's music for my lecture recital. My doctoral lecture recital was entitled "The Organ Music of Philip Barnett McIntyre." That meant the world to me. And there were people, on the campus of the University of Missouri, Kansas City, in the conservatory, who were fascinated. They didn't know this name. And I think that's why John Obetz let me run with it. He was fascinated, and he knew I was passionate about preserving Philip's legacy. But ultimately, no matter what, Philip had the last word. Uh, and that's something Levy Armwood, I know you know that name, who was
Yeah,
pastor of
yeah.
Ebenezer in Richmond. Philip and I both served that church at different times. And I remember Levy saying this, he Philip would use his postlude as a way of having the last word on Sunday morning. So he was a character, and I just wished I had known him more. But yeah, he deserved deserves every bit of attention that he has gotten recently, and I hope there's more.
But I'm thankful that you shared that, because that just really lifts up the fact that no matter what somebody thinks about you adversely, they can't take away your talent and your gifts. So the fact that you wrote this dissertation and people are still trying to learn even more about him, it's fascinating. So thank you so much. And as we
Oh,
we wrap our
I want to
time
say
up,
that I want to say this, and then I'll shut up about Philip. When I talked to Levy, Levy has since passed. Levy Armwood, who was director of music at Ebenezer when Philip was there, and Levy, of course, went into the ministry. But when I received such negative feedback from my work on Philip and research and publications and so forth, And I said, wow, Levy, these people are still angry about something that
Mm.
Philip said or did or some moment or what have you. I have no idea. And Levy said this. Levy was uh, very terse when it comes to words. He was right to it. And he said, Roy, I consider that post-mortem jealousy.
Mm.
I'll never forget it. Yeah. I think there's a lot of truth in that, but I'll shut up about Philip because that's another conversation.
Well, listen, Roy, this has been a wonderful conversation. We've been able to touch on, I mean, your journey as a composer, as a church musician, and you're in this full circle phase of your career now, again, as professor of music. Talk to me about, and I want to say congratulations to you because I promised that I was going to put this out there, but I was going to wait for you. You had already told me about your appointment at Goucher College and what you were doing there. Talk to me about your program and how you connect all of these things musically at Goucher.
Wow. Well, going back to the organ, what's in the chapel? A 30 rank Schlicker pipe organ. So I still have access to a good instrument. Goucher is a small liberal arts school located in the heart of Towson, and it used to be all female until the mid 80s, 1980s, and it went co-ed around 1986. It's a small school. I have a choir of maybe 22 right now. I also direct the orchestra, which is a shock to me. Um, but I absolutely love it. It's something new, something I didn't anticipate, but my chair asked me to try it, and I thought, why not? If nothing else, it'll be experience on my CV. Uh, but it's working. It's working. So I have the choir, which is called the Goucher Choral Society, and the Goucher Orchestra, which is also faculty and student. Uh, there are faculty and student participants there, which really pleases me. I enjoy working with colleagues who find time in their busy lives to still play the violin, still play the flute. Uh, and I teach basic piano and sight singing and ear training. We don't have the music major program anymore. We lost that about 5 years ago. It may come back, but there is a music minor program. So
That's
we still have our hands on music, and we are. I'll put this plug out there on March 8th at Goucher. We're hosting the With One Voice Choral Festival. I'll send you the flyer. 8 choirs will
please.
be coming to Goucher. Uh, the Towson University Men's Glee Club, the North Hartford High Treble Choir, the Maryland State Boy Choir. Goucher, of course, will be singing. Deer Creek Chorale. I accompany Deer Creek. The Youth Choir of Deer Creek. And another group, Charm City Sings of Baltimore. And I have a feeling I'm missing one more. Yes, Bel Air Community Choir.
Oh
So
wow,
they're all
that's a
coming to our campus on March 8th at 3 o'clock. Yes,
wow. Well, make sure you send me that
I will
information.
send that.
That's
I will.
that's there. Well, Roy, thank you so much. This has been a wonderful morning chatting with you. Again, this has been the conversation series on Across the Arts. I'm Patrick D. McCoy, and this is a special collaboration with the Washington, D.C. based Heritage Signature Chorale as they spotlight Black composers. And I hope that you all will join the Heritage Signature Chorale on February the 22nd for their Black Composers Concert. And of course, we're going to hear Roy Belfield's arrangement on there. So among many others. So again, that concert is on Saturday, February the 22nd at 6 o'clock p.m. at First Congregational United Church of Christ. And of course, you can get tickets at the Heritage Chorale's website. And it's going to be a wonderful afternoon of music. Amplifying Black composers. You're going to hear spirituals, you're going to hear anthems, you're going to hear a variety, the wider breadth of the Black music experience. So again, I am Patrick D. McCoy, and we've been chatting here with composer, conductor, organist, music extraordinaire, I should say, Dr. Roy L. Belfield Jr., a native of Petersburg, of whom I'm so proud to know. Again, thank you so much, Roy.
Thank you.
Again, that you've been listening and watching Across the Arts. I'm your host, Patrick D. McCoy. Be sure to follow us on YouTube and also on Facebook and Instagram. Again,